Hello, welcome back to a new YouTube video. If you're new to my channel, then my name is Katie. I'm an artist and I've been doing a daily art challenge since last August. So every 2 weeks here on my YouTube channel, I just do a roundup of what I've been creating and talk a bit about what I've been thinking, how I've been finding the daily art challenge, and talking through a little bit more in detail about what I've been filling my sketchbooks with. So I'm recapping weeks 36 and 37 today, and these weeks are basically all in 2 sketchbooks apart from one which was loose, but I've been working in my A5 Royal Talons and my 12x12 Royal Talons, and so they're all in here today. Usually I do vary it a little bit with A4 sketchbooks and sometimes A3, but week 38, which I'm currently in the middle of, I've been doing a lot of work outside of my sketchbooks, so I'll recap those in a couple of weeks. But for now I'm just going to show you through all the pieces I've done in here. Day 210 was this sunset scene, and I was really happy with how this turned out considering I don't normally do urban scenes like this. I actually filmed the process of this one and also the next one, which you'll see in a minute, for my patrons. So I filmed the process for this one and the rural scene, which was day 211, and talked through my process and showed how I create my landscapes, and I was really happy with how that video turned out. I really talked through my process, and even though they are different subjects, it's the exact sort of same process in my head and the same techniques I use. So if you are interested in that, then that's on the Sketch Club tier over on my Patreon. But this was actually referenced from a photo I found from a news website where they were complaining about the traffic. So it kind of just proves that inspiration can come from anywhere. But I really loved the photo, I loved the colours, and so I wanted to recreate it in my sketchbook. And it came really naturally to me, which was nice. It felt really easy to do, and I'm really happy with the looseness of some of these marks. And I'm really happy I did all the cars at the bottom. I used to never draw cars, but I definitely feel like they've moved into my comfort zone now, which is good. And I just think that they add so much life to this piece, and there's a lot of movement here, which I'm really pleased with. It feels very warm because of the tones of the sky and the colours in the background. So I was really happy with how this turned out, and it just sort of made me feel more confident in my abilities. So like I said, day 211 was another one that I filmed for that process video on Patreon. And again, I really love this one. This is inspired by a piece which I did in my previous A5 sketchbook. And it's kind of another one in the series. So this is another one of Cornwall, which I found on Google Maps. And I'll link all the references that I've used down below for each of the days. But like I said, this was on Google Maps and I just randomly dropped my pin. This landed in Gurnard's Head, and I just really love the view over the cliff. And I think what I love most about this one is the vibrancy. It's definitely more vibrant and bold than the previous Cornwall piece, which this was sort of inspired by. And again, I've done very similar things. I've done the lines in the water, and I've added in burgundy and pink marks down here, which I like to do in my landscapes. So it's kind of a simple scene, especially in the foreground when it's just grass. So I really, really wanted to make as much texture as I could so that it was more interesting. And my mixed media really helps with that. So I've used gouache, Tombows, Ecoline brush pens, some Neocolors, some pencils. So I've really thrown it all out there just to try and get this texture in the front. And I think it worked really nicely. So overall I was really happy with this spread, and I feel like it blends a lot of the things that I've learned so far from the Daily Art Challenge into this one piece. Day 212 is actually a redraw of a previous piece I did, and I'll pop that on screen so you can see what it looked like. But I did that in January last year, so I really wanted to redraw it and see how my style has developed. And I was really happy with how this one turned out. I obviously changed the angle and view of the house, but to me it was more dynamic, and so I think that's one of the things that shows my growth as an artist, is I can do more complicated views of houses and things. And personally I find this a bit too bright and garish. I wasn't too pleased with the colours, and it feels a little bit like it's floating, and I don't know, something about it doesn't feel right to me. It feels a little bit too fantasy almost, I think, because the colours are like ramped up to 11. But it was a really good thing to do, to see my growth as an artist from like the first one. But I think they like both stand on their own. I really still like the first one that I did. I think it has a really nice charm to it. But I definitely feel like I can see my confidence growing, and a lot of the comments on the post on Instagram said they could see really confident mark making here in comparison to the other one, which I totally agree with, and so that was really nice to see. And it's also a really good idea if you are stuck on what to draw, of going back through your sketchbooks and seeing if you find something that you'd like to redraw, and maybe see if you've changed how your approach changes, which I think was the main thing I took from this one. Day 213, I was really struggling and having a bad art day, but I was back on the road trip, so I was in my 12 by 12 centimetre sketchbook, and I just really struggled on that day. I was finding different views, and like usually I find these road trip pieces really easy, and like I'll find the view and I'll draw it and paint it and it's absolutely fine. But for some reason what I was painting wasn't what I wanted in my head. It didn't match up. So the first one I did, I've done 3 spreads total. The first view I found worked really nicely as a double page spread, so that's why I filled both pages. And I was really enjoying this one up until I added the sky, and I think it's mostly because it doesn't have, like, I feel like you don't always get this in real life, but I really wanted more definition between the two, and they kind of like blend together. And there are elements I liked, like the water down here, but I was just disappointed with this one, considering I thought it was going in a good direction, and I feel like sometimes your disappointment from what you thought it would be really affects the final result. But still, looking back on this, I know that it's not my best, which is why I went on to the next spread, which again I was really disappointed with. I did get some nice feedback on Instagram, but something about this house, I think it's the lines on the outside, it just looks too cartoony for my style. And then the boldness of this compared to like the lack of anything of interest in this view, I just don't think they sit well together. So then I wasn't happy with that. I wouldn't want to put it on my grid as like the main photo. So then I tried again, and I did another double page spread of a view from a cliff top, and I was much happier with this one. I feel like I really had to work through the other two, whereas this one I just tried to switch off and not worry about the end result. When I'm creating bad art, it really like affects my mental health, and so I was really getting more and more disheartened as I did the other 2 spreads. So I took a break and came back to this in the afternoon, and I'm much happier with this one. I feel like you can tell that it came a little bit easier to me, and I just feel like this fits in with the rest of the spreads in the road trip series a bit more. And yeah, it's got that nice balance of looseness, and I really like the colours, so I'm glad I did work through that sort of art block and like the disappointment and created something nice in the end. But always taking a break helps, and like sometimes just sleeping on it and trying again the next day is much better for creating better artwork, because usually I find that it's my thoughts and feelings that are affecting the art more than the actual art themselves. So I'm glad I ended this day on a good spread in my eyes, and I'm glad I did work through it. So in that week I joined Sarah Dyer's Patreon, and I feel like joining other artists' Patreons is really important for like my personal and professional development. Obviously I'm not, I don't have an employer, so I can't do any like training things, so I see the Patreons that I'm part of as part of that basically. So I joined Sarah's Patreon because I'm looking at creating more narrative in my work, and she creates a lot of picture books. And so I rewatched one of her drawing sessions and created this little mini book. And this is based off of Invisible Cities, which is a book about a city with like 60 domes, and she had this excerpt and she read out a bit of it and found all of these references which we could use and then draw from. And it started out as a larger piece of paper, and then it folds up into the little book. And I'm so happy with how this turned out. It felt very easy to do. I just watched the zoom back and was in my own little world. I found this like colour palette from just picking out different Tombos and coloured pencils from my pencil case, and it was just really enjoyable to piece together. And I didn't we didn't know what it would look like at the end, or like how many things we had to draw or anything, so like the scales all over the place and stuff, but I think it just adds a lot of whimsy to this book, and I was really pleased with how this turned out. It makes me want to do more things like this, and like I didn't overthink this, so it was perfect to follow on from the day before. And I just really love some of the elements in this, like this little this dragon at the top here and this statue at the back. These things I wouldn't normally pick to draw, so it was nice to push out my comfort zone. And these were all like timed, so between 3 and 10 minutes I think it was, for like some of the domes and some of the statues and things. So you know how much I love to draw on a timer, and this was a really good way to break it down, and like such a big project that could be a bit daunting. So I'm really happy with this one, and I definitely want to do more little books like this. Day 215 was actually Easter Friday, so I wasn't sure if I was able to make time to do my daily art that day because I had a family event, but I'm really glad I made time for it. So we went to my parents' house where we were doing an Easter celebration. I kind of went a bit antisocial and sat at the bottom of the garden, but it was really nice because like my brother and sisters came to sit with me and we had a nice chat whilst I did this drawing, and I'm really pleased with it. I was a little bit disappointed at the time because I always am with my plein air stuff because it doesn't turn out as easily as I want it to, and it feels very different. But I'm actually pleased with this one because it feels a little bit closer to my actual style when I'm in the studio, and that's what I'm always trying to get. So I didn't use much paint. I did use some gouache in the top, but this is mostly done with Ecoline and Tombow brush pens, Neocolors and coloured pencils. And I'm just really pleased with the apple tree. This is the view of my parents' house from the back. So it's a view I know very well, but I've never actually drawn it before. And it's very bright, and I think it was like the greens that kind of threw me off it a little bit in the beginning. But I'm really happy with like some of the details on the house, and it gives me really nice memories of like sitting there on this lovely day with my family, like hearing them in the background or chatting and things, and then having them sit with me whilst I painted. It was a really nice experience, so I'm really glad I did this on Easter Friday, and it definitely will be something that I'll remember more so, because generally I find when I draw I remember things better, so I'm really glad I captured this day. On to week 37 now, and day 216. You can see this one is definitely inspired by the previous Cornwall piece. So this is actually in Dorset. This is RSPB Arn, and again I found this view on Google Maps. And you can really see like my style from the other pieces come through here, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. It is quite similar to this Cornwall one. You can see the colours are very similar. But I really like that. I feel like you can sort of see my style coming through now, and again you can see the confidence in my landscape paintings. But again I did the lines on the water, and then I added lots of texture here in the front. When I was doing this I was worried that it was too much, like I added too many lines and things, but looking back I think it needed it because this is the foreground and there's a lot less going on here. In the Google Maps view there wasn't a boat here, but it looked really empty. So I added that in, and again that's a good learning point for me that I can add things in and I don't have to stick exactly to the references because it's just real life, so it's not made for art, so I can add things in and take things out where needed. So I really love the colours on this one. Again, I added the little pink accents here, and like there's some lilac purple things in the distance which really helps. And this one was quite messy, but it was quite easy to do. I did my layer of gouache first, and then I went in with my mixed media stuff, so my pens and pencils. And I was really happy with how this one turned out. This is definitely my comfort zone, and I really enjoy creating paintings like this. So for day 217, I actually used a reference which my brother and sister-in-law took from their holiday in Wales the week before. And it's a really good way to get references that you wouldn't normally pick, especially if you're not travelling at the time. And it's a really good way to get references that are obviously copyright free, is to get your family to take pictures and send them on to you. And they were just gorgeous. They went to North Wales and it's such a beautiful place. and they sent them to me for me to paint from, which was such a good idea, and I'm so glad they did. And it's definitely given me the idea of getting friends and family to do this more often, because they'll go to other places and like we can spread out a bit more when we work together like that, and I can just paint them all. And obviously for a daily art challenge, I'm always looking for things to paint. So this is up in North Wales. This is a National Trust property there, and I just was blown away by the colours, and I really wanted to recreate that in my sketchbook. It's definitely more muted. It's kind of like a pastel. It feels a little bit magical almost because of all the pinks and the blues and the greens. And like I really tried to get the distance, so you can see up here I went with really soft marks and mixed a bit more white into the colours compared to the foreground, and I think that works really nicely. It's definitely messier than I thought it would be, and I wasn't sure when I first did it if I liked it or not, but I definitely like it now, and I'm really happy with the colours and the feeling from this spread. Definitely does feel ethereal, and I think that's because of all the pinks. But there are also elements I really like this up here and the like the little textures in the trees. So to me it's definitely a little bit too loose, but I think it does work in this setting, and it was really nice to draw a painting that my brother and sister-in-law had seen in person, and then them really enjoy the art that I'd created from that as well. I often find that the next day from doing quite a bigger piece, because that one did take quite a while, always suffers a little bit creatively, as if I've used up my energy and then I need another day to recover. So for day 218 I did a really simple one, and I just did these 15-minute fish. So these took 15 minutes. I did it on a timer as part of Odd Orange Stationery's drawing session, which I think they do every month. And I really enjoyed it. I like working to timers because it stops me from overthinking, and because I was creatively like de-energized because of the previous day, I needed something where I wasn't thinking about it. So having someone supply me the reference and saying, you have this long to draw it, go for it, really helps switch my brain off and just do it. And I really like how these turned out. They are obviously very simple, and I used gouache and Tombows and Ecoline brush pens, and then I went on top with Neocolors and Prismacolor pencils. So my usual way of working, which is my default when I am working under timer, but I did use gouache here, which I don't normally do for timed things, and I think that works really well with the texture of the fish. So yeah, very simple, and I wasn't sure whether it was too simple. I wasn't sure whether I should have added a background, which is what I normally do, but obviously in such a small amount of time I didn't have time to do that. But I think they stand on their own, and this is the sort of thing that sketchbooks are for anyway. So I was happy I was still able to create something I was proud of on a day where I wasn't necessarily feeling it. Day 219 I was creating another panel page, again in my A5 sketchbook, and this time I went on Map Crunch and I changed the region to be Europe and let it pick the country. So Map Crunch is a random Google Maps generator that I use a lot in my work, and I'll generally let it pick a location and then I'll sort of explore around the neighbourhood and draw the different views that I see. And that's what I did here, and this time, because my panel spreads usually take a long time, I wanted to limit my timings on this one. So each panel took 5 minutes each. And like I said, normally my panel spreads are very labour intensive, they take a long time. So it was really nice to work differently in panels. And it was harder on obviously some of the bigger ones. I feel like these are a little bit too messy. So I'm happier with the other three because they are smaller panels, and I think that works better for just 5 minutes. But you could definitely have a longer timer for these. And one of the things that I think helps the most was that I pre-picked my colours. So I've added in the colour palette there on the page, but I picked that out before I did the drawings. And because 5 minutes is such a short amount of time, it really stopped me from wasting time trying to find colours and using all of the colours I had. And I think that's what makes this spread so successful, is the colour palette, the limited colours that I don't normally use. I don't often use pink, and I definitely don't use navy for the line work. which is probably my favourite thing about this whole spread, is seeing the contrast between the navy and the pink on the houses. So I definitely wish I had some more time on some of these, but overall I think the spread is really successful and probably one of my favourite spreads from these couple of weeks. Day 220, we were back in Wales, and again I was using another view which my brother and sister-in-law had sent me, and this is, I'm not going to pronounce it because I'm very bad at pronunciation, especially Welsh, but it's like this little railway town. It had this gorgeous river here and then the railway. And again, this is my usual way of working, but it's a little bit looser than the other landscapes because there is more details. So I went in with a layer of gouache and mapped out all the shapes. So I used blocks of colour, and then I went over it with the details on top. So because I don't sketch beforehand, that's why it turns out quite messy, but I think that's just my style now, and I can definitely tighten it up, but I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I feel like it gives it more energy and character, and as a spread I'm really happy with this one. It was nice to work in like 2 panels, even though it is one full spread. I didn't really think about that at the time, but I think it worked nicely, because I easily could have done it over the spread and like filled in this middle gutter, but I like the way it works. It's like 2 sides of the river. I enjoyed putting in all the details like on the windows and things, which I always love to do. And overall I'm happy with this one. Again, I did the lines on the water, which you've seen in the other 2 landscapes, like the Dorset one and the Cornwall one. So again, this just feels very safe and my style, and I feel like I'm really gaining my confidence with stuff like this, and that's a really nice thing to see for my daily art challenge. So the very last art for week 37 is day 221, and again I was back on the road trip, and so in my tiny little sketchbook. And this one came much easier to me than the previous weeks, which I was really pleased about, and it feels like I've got my confidence back with this road trip series. But this is actually the penultimate one, so I've got one more to do and we'll be in LA. So this virtual road trip I've been doing is on Google Maps and will be coming to an end. So I'm going to start a new road trip after a little break. But this time, this was in Santa Barbara and then Malibu. So again, I did the polls on my stories and got feedback and gave the choices out to my audience, and then they answered them, and then I draw what they wanted to see. So that's always really enjoyable to make it interactive, and I'm really pleased with how this spread turned out. I used gouache mostly on this one, whereas sometimes I use more Neocolors or more pencils for a softer look. But I'm really pleased with how they turned out and how they work together. This one on the left obviously has the mountains in the background, and it's got a lot more greenery than this one, which is of Malibu State Beach. And one of the things I like about this one is like the ice cream cart in the front. I think that adds a lot of character, and I think that adds more narrative as well than just a plain scene. But I think they work nicely together. I think the colours balances really well, and I was really pleased with this one. And it, again, like I said, it came easier to me than the previous week's one. I feel like with this road trip I could draw a lot more. I could spend way more and easily fill up this whole sketchbook just on that one road trip. But it's also been quite nice to move quickly and just do a few polls, because otherwise I feel like some projects could go on and on a little bit. So this is making me work quicker and also draw faster and really curate the scenes a little bit more. So like I said, I'll be doing the very last one on this LA Pacific Coast Highway road trip, and then I'll start a new one in a few weeks. So I am doing some research, but if you have any ideas on where I should road trip next, then please do leave them in the comments. So that wraps up week 36 and 37 of the Daily Art Challenge. As always, I really love to hear what your favourite is. My favourite is the limited colour palette spread. I think that worked really nicely, but I also am really pleased with this Wales one as well. If you want to keep up with my daily art challenge as I do it, I do create on the day and then post on the day, so you can find me on Instagram at Katie_Moody. I'll leave any links to things I've mentioned, like my Patreon or the Patreons I've done a few challenges from, as well as all the references for each piece down below in the description box. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another daily art recap, but I'll be back next Sunday with a different video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.